Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Good evening. I am Vivian Crawford, and welcome to Conversations Across Time. Tonight we are rejoined by our panel from last week, and seated to my immediate right is Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. Welcome again, Secretary McNamara.
Thank you. Welcome as well.
Secretary McNamara, you were a World War II veteran.
I was.
So I'm wondering, is that part of the mens rea that you brought to the Office of Secretary of Defense, that we are exceptional, we will win?
Sure. And not only that, I mean, it was part of my educational experience at Berkeley and Harvard, my experience not only in the Second World War, but being able to use those same principles at Ford Motor Company, for instance, and make them more profitable and make them grow. There was no reason for me to believe that I couldn't do the same thing for the benefit of the United States.
Seated next to Secretary McNamara is a frequent visitor to this show, and that is President Fidel Castro. Welcome, President.
Thank you. I am General Fidel Castro, President of Cuba. I have sustained life over a period of 50 years as President after the revolution, and many things have happened to transform Cuba into the resilient nation that it is today, in spite of many atrocities committed against our people. But I'm here to say today that our decisions have been made to sustain us as a human people, and that out of all of the troubles and all of the problems we have had, we have survived. And through it all, history shall absolve me.
And seated next to President Castro is another frequent guest, and that is President Charles DeGaulle. Welcome, President DeGaulle.
Good to be back. I'm President Charles DeGaulle. I was President of France from 1959 to 1969. I continually warned the United States and its presidents, Johnson and Kennedy, about getting involved in a land war in Southeast Asia. I told them that when indigenous people rally around a cause and revolt, there is no power on earth, no matter how strong militarily or economically, that can defeat them. My warnings were not heeded, and it led to a terrible situation in Vietnam. We're still learning from, the United States is still learning from that today. Part of the program will deal with what we learned from Vietnam and what we haven't learned from Vietnam.
When we spoke last, I'm so sorry. Woo. Okay. And also, seated to my left is my co-host, who is always here, former State Representative Babette Joseph.
Thank you, Vivian.
Now what the audience needs to understand is that Babette had to tap me because she kept telling me to mention my name, and I remembered my name and forgot to mention hers. So that's a little humor for our audience to let you know what happens here in the background of Conversations Across Time. When we spoke last, we were talking about profiteering and comparing. The title of this series is of course, When Will We Ever Learn? Vietnam to Iraq, and we were comparing, making the comparison between those two incursions into countries where the populace didn't necessarily want us there. So I'd like tonight, if we can, to talk a little bit about the atrocities that happened in both those instances. For instance, you know, we hear a lot about Abu Ghraib. And the fact that Brigadier General Janis Kopinski tried to illuminate the world in terms of what kind of atrocities were happening in the name of the United States in Abu Ghraib. But what a lot of you might not know is during the Vietnam era, there was, and I have to do this phonetically, but there was Phu Quoc, which was a notorious prison in South Vietnam, and Con Doc, which was another prison in South Vietnam. What's interesting about that is that the United States at that time engaged, because we did not have many people that spoke the Vietnamese language. Of course, that's how the Gulf of Tonkin happened, because there wasn't anybody on board who spoke
I
who
imagine
spoke the
there
language.
were plenty of Vietnamese who spoke it fine, but they weren't good enough for the U.S., I bet.
I think you're probably right. That's probably an accurate assessment. But what happened in Phu Quoc was that the Red Cross was able to get information on the horrible treatment of the prisoners in South Vietnam. So what the United States has been able to do and is still doing is getting other fighting forces to commit the torture that we ourselves cannot do. That's what happened in Phu Quoc. That's what happened in Abu Ghraib. In Phu Quoc, we hired Vietnamese people saying, well, we don't speak the language, so we're going to let them run the prison. And of course, their methods of getting information was entirely beyond what the United States would have accepted. So I'd like us to, first of all, address the fact that My Lai, the My Lai massacre, there was one person that was actually prosecuted for that, but this was information that the government knew. And the change from assessing winning the war from territory gain to body count, which happened under your watch, and Secretary McNamara, in defense of you, I don't believe that when you instituted that policy of let's use body count because we are losing this war, but it'll make the American people more comfortable that perhaps we are not losing, to use...
Well, that's not exactly what it was, but I mean, originally I believed that the body count was part of the program that we had, where we would, if we could kill more people than they killed us, then eventually we would win the war. That's what that was about. It was not necessarily to make the people in the United States think that this was the right thing to do, but it certainly helped to think that perhaps we were on the winning side. It
characterized the war that we were winning?
Well, we had the upper hand, let's say, at that time.
Now,
I don't want to use winning, but
okay,
the upper hand.
but what's interesting, that an interesting consequence of that I don't believe you anticipated, was that there would be generals like General Julian Ewell, who was called the Butcher of the Delta, who would in fact just engage in killing babies. They added that to the body count. Anyone that was dead and was Vietnamese was automatically categorized as Viet Cong.
Well, you're right. I did not think that that would happen. And I sort of felt, and of course I was in the military myself, and I thought that the generals and the colonels below them wouldn't do anything like that, wouldn't just indiscriminately kill people. And what they did here, it was for their own whatever. Yes. They were trying to build themselves up. They would just, listen, a North Vietnamese, a person from North Vietnam and a person from South Vietnam look exactly the same.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if you kill South Vietnamese like they did in My Lai and just add them to the body count. Now, what they eventually did that really brought this to the surface was they said, oh, listen, we don't need just bodies, but what about the weapons? Bring in the weapons. And they would find that 400 or 500 Vietnamese were killed and there were only 30 or 40 weapons.
Which meant
so
that
it became clear. I want to point out that I was no longer Secretary of Defense when this happened. But certainly if I was, I would have done everything I could to bring those people back who were doing that and prosecute them and do whatever I had to do, because that was certainly not what I had in mind when we instituted. It was certainly a result of the body count, and I admitted that later on, and this is certainly part of that. But it was not what my intention was, and I would have done everything that I possibly could have done to prevent that from happening further.
Secretary, you said that the generals did this on their own in terms of the body count, but the whole promotion structure in your military was based on, did they meet their quotas of body counts? So for you to obviate any responsibility for that, if your general didn't meet the quota, he would not get his promotion.
You didn't listen to what I just said. I didn't promote. I promoted the body count just as a statistic, but I didn't believe that they would indiscriminately kill South Vietnamese just to increase their body
If
count.
their promotion
general
was
thought you should have
predicated on the
anticipated
body
that.
count, then why wouldn't they kill innocent people to
Yes,
build up
you
their
should have
country?
anticipated
Listen,
that. Would you explain?
I was
to
a
the
soldier
audience
myself,
what
and I
my
would have
lie
never
was?
have done that.
Would you
Yes.
explain
And
that?
I think that first of all, it's important for the audience to understand that my lie was but one example. It's the example that people use, but it was certainly not the only time that the forces in Vietnam massacred innocent people. And in fact,
They killed a whole
village of children and
old
women and
people.
old people, and said that they were all Viet Cong. And of course, when the information was discovered, and My Lai became it became a cause célèbre.
Well, listen, the only good thing that came out of that was that's what really turned around a lot of people's opinion in the United States about
the
the
massacre,
war.
yes.
And the end of the war was then in view because of
Because
that.
of the massacre.
Absolutely. But those pictures that came back of that little girl running who had been bombed with napalm, and
Yes.
she was naked,
Yes.
and the assassination of the on film they had the
yes,
I mean,
we'll
all those,
show
and
that
that's another
picture.
thing that helped to cut the war short.
Right, but
Let me say this: war for America is commonplace psyche, because if you look at the history of how the West was won, you talk about John Wayne, cowboy, all of that
a
kind
good soldier, yeah.
it's an inbred part of the culture of the United States of America, and so war is a nasty business. War is nasty.
It's
Everywhere.
awful. War's awful.
Everywhere, but the difference between war and revolution, when you talk about a war, you're
Okay.
talking about all bets are off, even with the Geneva Convention saying this is how we're going to kill each other, okay? Okay.
We're going to have an agreement how we're going to kill each other.
Treaties
All's
are
fair in
like
love and war, remember.
roses and young women. They just fall away. They don't last.
but
They look good.
Yes, exactly.
that's the
Listen,
point.
war's cruel.
But
And
then-
this country, I have to say this because it's even evident today in our gun laws. I mean, I know when I was younger, and
or no gun
people
laws.
didn't walk around where I lived with guns.
Yes.
I mean, it was very, very difficult to get a permit. You had to prove that you were carrying a lot of money and you were a responsible person before you could even be allowed to carry a gun. And to this day, I don't understand why people are allowed to walk around with guns on their hip. But it's certainly ingrained. Well, that's here,
ingrained.
where we are here.
It's
But
ingrained
you
in
go
our-
out to Texas and you go out to Montana and Wyoming.
There's
And,
plenty of guns in Philadelphia.
oh, there's more guns than, believe me, there are plenty of guns here. But the point
Secretary
is,
McNamara, would those atrocities that occurred in Southeast Asia, Indochina, your Vietnam, have occurred if the people were Caucasians?
you know, that's an interesting question, and I would say yes. I would say yes. I mean, because I don't think that we were in Vietnam because the people were Asian. It was a yellow race.
Secretary
That's
McNamara,
not the
here's my
I
question.
posed
We
to
went to
you, Mr.
Iraq, and these
Secretary.
people were white, and the same
but
thing
they were the
happened,
wrong
and there were
religion. I mean,
atrocities there
there's
too. It
But they
doesn't
weren't
make any
Christians.
difference.
See, that's the thing. They weren't Christians.
Right, and
That's-
the other ones
Who were
weren't
Christians?
white.
I know, in Iraq, in other words, when you say the people were white, but they weren't Christians. I think that somehow this country has gotten it in their head that for some reason that, and I want to be clear and careful how I say this, that Christianity somehow is superior to all other world religions, and that our form of government, which is not a democracy, by the way, I mean, that's such a misnomer, but that our form of government is better, and our values are different. Nothing bothers me more than for someone to say, but I'm a Christian. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Does that give you some higher moral authority?
Well, that's what he was talking about before. He had a higher moral authority
Yeah, spiritual.
by putting people in prison.
It is
It wasn't
not-
part of
it
it.
is not
The point
a-
is, I hate that
that-
too.
that is not a
the
religious
the
connotation.
very first Bill of Rights, by the way, in the
Morality has nothing to do
Constitution,
with-
is the right to freedom of religion. It doesn't make any difference what your religion is, and all of the religions, be it Muslim or Jews or Christians or Protestants, They're all moral. They all have moral precepts.
And they all have
So-
people that are not moral.
And they all have
claim
people that go against
Yes.
those moral
Yes.
precepts.
Yes.
Listen, if there were no religion, there probably would be about 10 more million people living in this
Well,
world
that's
today.
what Richard
More
Dawkins
people were
said.
killed in the name of religion,
what
just like they
Richard
are now in,
Dawkins
said.
in Iraq. The
Mr.
Sunnis and the Shiites been killing themselves for thousands of years.
One
And
of the things
Protestants
we
and the
learned
Catholics.
in Vietnam, my country and my generals told me, is that the people there were different and their culture was different. And in order for you to, the United States, your country, to make a case to fight there, you had to build up hatred for those people, because you cannot convince your military, your generals maybe, but not the average soldier in the field, to fight. He wasn't fighting to defend his homeland. He wasn't fighting because his country was attacked or his sisters or mothers or brothers were in danger. He was fighting for some theory that
He
you
was
guys
fighting
had
for dominoes.
for dominoes, and he didn't. So you had to build up a hatred for the other, and that led to those atrocities, because they were less of human beings than you thought you were, and you instilled that in the military.
Somebody came back from a concentration camp and how could you treat humans this way? And the answer is very simple. You can't treat humans this way, but you can treat cockroaches this way, right?
Right.
So once you convince your group that the out group are cockroaches, doesn't it hurt your conscience to step on them?
Yeah, yeah. It's your job to step on them.
Exactly.
You get praised for stepping on them.
But isn't that also what we see with the inclination to define our current president as something other than?
Yes. Sent soldiers to Vietnam, and Senator McCain claims that he was tortured by your soldiers.
That's probably true, because he was there. And he was there on the premise of bringing people a form of life that they didn't even ask for. So he was an enemy.
No, they didn't have any interest.
So when you're an
in us.
enemy, you're an enemy caught up in a situation of war, you suffer the consequences of being an enemy of the people.
Well, he claims
where
there
you
were
were.
Cuban soldiers there.
Well, yeah, sure. There are Cubans now that we get rid of because they are violent, sinister people who are counter-revolutionary, the people who we have to extract from our philosophy, extract from our spiritual base.
I always doubted that he was actually tortured by Cubans, but so long as you've
I would not
confirmed it-
deny that there have been people.
What difference does it make
come
who
from Cuba
tortured
would do anything.
Whether they were Cubans or Vietnamese or Chinese
It
communists.
was a
or-
war. It was a
That's
war.
war. You're in war. I mean, you got to hit the other guy harder than he hit you. That's what war is.
But the
the
interesting-
concept, the whole
Excuse me,
concept of going to
excuse
war
me.
and making war
There-
is what we're concerned about. Once you're in a war, the rules are very, 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 very lax. I mean,
Well,
you're killing people.
I think the point
It's a
I was
terrible
trying to
thing.
make is that under Fidel Castro and that administration or regime, whatever you call it, in Cuba, they felt part of their mission was to help every indigenous people who was being suppressed, mostly by us, some by the French, the British, you know, in years before the Dutch, the Portuguese. I mean, everybody was a colonial power.
But one of the
Yeah,
things
but
that
we're
you
not
don't
talking
get.
about that.
that
We're
you-
talking about that today. I mean, do you think that's a problem? We're oppressing people today somewhere in the world? Who are we oppressing in the world
Everywhere.
today?
Everybody.
Everywhere. Oh, there we go.
Everybody.
How about your people that are
Well,
oppressed?
well-
They get in rowboats to try and row 100 miles
I-
away to get away from you.
have-
Why do they do
not
that?
only learned
I mean, even with the salsa music, which I love, and the great Cuban food, they still want to get out of
We
there.
learned in Algeria as well, there's numerous ways to oppress people. You
Yes.
don't-
Yeah, and he has
you
the
don't-
best ways.
You
He
don't,
kills
you
them.
don't only have
Get outta
to
here.
occupy a country to oppress the people. You can oppress them economically by dominating their
Oh, we can oppress them by
economy with
putting
your
embargoes
business.
on them
You-
like we did in
you-
Iran. You're
you
right.
don't- You don't have to oppress people by, right.
And well, first of all, in Iraq, how about the embargo that we had against Iraq? And the interesting thing for me is how Saddam Hussein was someone that we empowered, and then when we got tired of him, then all of a sudden we have an embargo against him, and we wonder why the Iraqis hate us. I mean, I'm just confused as to why there is some confusion about that. We have, in the name of spreading a way of life to people that we tend to think is better, we have committed some horrible atrocities. And the problem is we're giving, when we talk about the roads and the infrastructure, if I'm a farmer and I'm subsisting off the land, I don't need a road. You understand? I just need to be left alone in my little village to raise my family. We keep coming in with Western notions.
Not always.
Okay.
What about all the good we do in a lot of poor countries in Africa, where we send tremendous amounts of aid? We teach them how to fish, and we teach them how to farm. I mean, there are a lot of things going on in the world. You're looking at the worst of the worst.
They know.
And it's war, and it gets all the publicity. But behind all of that publicity, the United States does a lot of good. They spend tremendous amounts of money around the world, not in fighting, but in trying to make the lives of impoverished people better.
I agree.
And we try to do it here in the United States too, because we have impoverished people here, and there's some people just don't believe in that. But the point is that we do a tremendous amount of good around the world.
I was involved in a medical mission. And
Guatemala, Central America, South America,
but
Africa.
What we've done in Guatemala in the negative, I think, well outweighs the little efforts we've made to help villages.
See, that's the question. If I'm a person and I'm living in a village in Vietnam, Guatemala, Chile, if I'm and
Chile's pretty middle class.
Where?
But no, I'm simply saying.
Oh, Chile,
but I'm simply saying that if you come and disturb my way of life and impose your values on me, I don't know that you've helped me.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying in those situations we did, but there was some other purpose for that. It was not to degrade the people in that area. It was over territory. We're talking about territory there. But when you take that out of the equation and you look at all of the other things that we've done around the world, and you're going to say we did more harm than good, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, if you want to weigh it on a scale,
I'm more cynical.
Mr.
Well, you can
Secretary,
be cynical
I guess you
about
would
it.
have to ask
The people.
the people of the Philippines, the
Panama.
people
Yeah,
of
what-
Panama, the people of Cuba, the people
have you been to Panama lately?
I've heard it's a very
Have you been there?
nice place.
No,
It's a beautiful
I'm
place to
talking
go.
about the
There's
explo-
more
the
high rises, and more people are
exploitation,
making
the-
more money there than any place else in Central America.
Imperialistic
More than in Cuba.
exploitation of all of these people. Are they better off? There may be some people in those cultures that we learned in Algeria, we learned in Southeast Asia, that indigenous people are going to want independence, and it's not the business of the Western powers to determine what type of culture, what type of economy, and what type of government they have.
I think we're beginning to understand that, by the way.
hope
I think
so.
Obama, and if we can continue along those lines, I don't know if we can, but he has taken the road of diplomacy rather than aggression.
He understands.
And I think diplomacy is really the only way to deal with it. It's not an isolationist policy, by the way, because that's not what he's doing. But he's attacking these people with their minds and getting agreements from them that prevent war, not to make war.
Connecting with people more than
Exactly.
attacking people.
And that's, listen, years from now, when this discussion group is in 3D and, you know, whatever,
Yes.
people are going to look back at these 8 years, and it's going to be really a watershed for how civilization moved forward. I think he doesn't get any credit for that now. I mean, because of the politics.
Well, you know-
but when you're going to look at this in retrospect, you're going to find that what he did and what he's done is really remarkable.
History
in
shall
this thing.
absolve him.
And you're going to make a lot of money down there. Your people will
History
make a
shall
lot of
absolve
money.
Barack
History-
Obama.
I agree.
History will absolve
even
him.
though he invaded our privacy, terrible, couldn't get us out of the war.
Invaded whose privacy?
Everybody's, every citizen. You
For-
think your
for
phone
your-
up, your phone
for your-
Do I care if it helps me? Listen,
If
if
it
it
helps
helps
you be
me in
secure.
my country,
doesn't
prevent
help
people
you.
from coming over here to kill me, they
doesn't
can listen to
help.
my
It doesn't do
conversation.
it.
I don't have anything.
Anti-record
They would be
post
bored
office,
listening to
but
my
besides
conversations
that,
on the
he's
phone.
been a great
What here's the thing that I guess I want us
One
to.
of
You
my
talk about,
birthdays.
listen, when you talk about rights, there is not one right that we have that's absolute. I mean, the freedom of speech is a wonderful, but it's not just a
but you
freedom of
can't
speech
yell
to say
fire
anything you want. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater, okay?
right.
There's freedom to religion, but if you use that religion to kill people, well, that's not freedom of religion.
marry
That
more
religion
than
has to
one
be
wife.
put
But
down.
see, here's the thing. You know, we did a series called Warm Water, and in that we actually dissected what is happening in the Middle East and the fact that a lot of what's going on in the Middle East today bears the direct fingerprint of John Foster Dulles and his policies, which got us involved in nation building. That's the only way I can describe it, and taking away and interfering in the Middle East to such a degree that we are now faced with the conflict we are faced with. We have a new kind of enemy that we don't know how, and I'm just looking at, in Iraq, we were there because of the oil. If anybody thinks that we were there for any other reason, it's
Iraq.
Well, that's our policies in the Middle East, except for Israel, of course, which has no oil. But our policies in the Middle East have always been driven by oil because we didn't have enough of it ourselves. However, that's changing. We're now, if not right now, but certainly in the very, very near future, we're going to be energy independent. And we don't need the Saudi Arabians anymore, and we don't need the Iraqis anymore. And I think and I hope that if this conflict now is ever over, that we'll just step back and let them have their own country and do whatever they want, as long as they don't bother us.
That's a perfect example of progress at a price, because here in the United States, you have Marcellus Shale and you have fracking, but there's a cost involved in that progress where people are suffering as well. People are not embracing that any more than they embrace the Cuban Revolution wholeheartedly. There's always going to be detractors of a movement.
Yeah, but at the same time, when I talk about energy independence, I wasn't just talking about Marcellus Shale.
I'm talking about
and heavy oil. At the same time, we're increasing our wind energy, solar. The more solar panels are being built every day than ever before.
But how will you use that energy to combat the idea that war gets better? We get better at war as we develop more products.
We're not talking about war. We're talking about humanity. We're talking about
I don't think he was saying that.
doing everything but war. I'm talking about diplomacy. And I think that the diplomacy will get, if we're energy independent, our diplomacy is different toward the Middle East.
And I agree with that. What I do find frightening about this whole thing with the Middle East is that it seems that the oil industry has this country captive, because we're still fighting to protect their interests.
People are now thinking a lot like you would think, that it's better to have a better life than to have a tremendous amount of money. And that's why this free education, free college education, and free health care, and all of these is very, very appealing to the working people.
And with that, maybe in the future you have a Secretary of Peace. A wise man once said that a true friend is one who will help you do what you want to do, even if he disagrees with you. If you want it for yourself and you're a friend, you will lend your help and support to that friend. That is why, as an ally, I think that going overseas to Algeria, anywhere America goes to help support an ally is a true friend. If you go somewhere to change somebody's culture, to give them something you think they need and they don't need it, you're going to shove it down their throats and they're going to resist and choke.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.
I hope you join us for Conversations Across Time. It's an idea that has been germinating for a long time, and I believe there's something for everyone.
Hey y'all, it's your girl Touch here.
Your boy Charles Gregory in the building, man.
Look, a lot of people have been asking, how can we watch the show? Where can we find you? So I'm going to break it down for you, okay?
Put your W's up. We Talk Weekly.
We Talk Weekly TV on YouTube.
All day.
We Talk Weekly on the iFame channel, on the Roku. Bye. box.
13 million nationwide. That's what we hit and holla at us,
Just
man.
go onto the box, go into the music section,
Yeah.
iFame TV. We're on the biggest music channel on Roku, Charles.
On Roku, look.
Okay, and then Comcast and Verizon in Philadelphia, of course. I mean, we're the 4th largest TV nation network in the nation.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We talk weekly, but you know you gotta follow. Look, we on Instagram now. 60-second videos now. We here, man. We here.
60 seconds, and look, we telling you, you can find us. So make sure you follow us, tell your friends.
And tag a friend. Right now, tag a friend.
Yes, and we love you.